George Jones was more than just a country music legend. He became a living piece of Americana whose influence touched countless hearts across generations. Even today, people still talk about that unforgettable voice, capable of delivering deep emotional resonance. You don't have to be a country music devotee to appreciate the timeless appeal of songs like He Stopped Loving Her Today. But behind that classic tune and the countless chart successes lay a story filled with dazzling triumphs, deeply human struggles, and a legacy that continues to cast a wide shadow over music lovers everywhere. For anyone who grew up with his records playing softly in the background, or for anyone discovering him for the very first time, George Jones's journey through hardship, artistic breakthroughs, and eventual redemption offers lessons in resilience, creativity, and the profound power of heartfelt storytelling. George Jones was born on September 12, 1931, in Saratoga, Texas, during a time when the world seemed poised for a series of dramatic transformations. In America, the seeds of modern musical culture were taking root. Big bands, early country, and the rise of radio as a family pastime all combined to form a fertile ground for the next wave of artists. Jones's youth coincided with the tail end of the Great Depression, and his family lived under the kind of economic strains that forced them to move from town to town in search of steadier footing. Even in those years, when life often felt like a struggle simply to survive, music was one of his greatest comforts. The first time anyone noticed his talent was in church, where his naturally poignant singing voice set him apart from children his own age. He received his first guitar at the age of 9, and not long after he was singing for tips on the sidewalks of Beaumont, Texas, forging a bond with audiences before he even knew the meaning of stage fright. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, around the same time that Hollywood itself was undergoing a creative rebirth, George was making a name for himself in the thriving world of honky-tonk country. His breakthrough hits, including Why Baby Why, 1955, and White Lightning, 1959, were not just chart climbers. They were clarion calls that announced his arrival as a new voice in country music. The intensity of his performances and the almost operatic sorrow in his tone became trademarks. He was part of a golden era for country, a time that paralleled the new Hollywood spirit of experimentation and risk-taking in film. Just as new Hollywood directors were turning cinematic storytelling on its head, artists like Jones were rewriting the rulebook for how country could sound, making it more raw, emotional, and profoundly personal than ever before. By the 1960s, Jones had built a solid reputation as a master interpreter of heartbreak ballads. He recorded a series of successful duets with other country stars, including the legendary Melba Montgomery, which further showcased his ability to weave heartbreak and hope together in a single phrase. Around this time, one of his first lesser-known ventures took place. He was offered the chance to appear in a low-budget, country-themed film as a cameo performer. The movie itself never gained traction, overshadowed by more daring and topical new Hollywood films of the era, but it represented one of those fascinating early crossovers where music stars were tiptoeing into cinema, something that might have grown if circumstances had been different. Although that film faded into obscurity, it remains a small, overlooked piece of George Jones's story that underscored his willingness to try new creative avenues. Another rarely discussed highlight came in the mid-1960s when he briefly experimented with a more rockabilly style under a pseudonym, Thumper Jones, to see if it might broaden his appeal. While that experiment met with limited commercial success and some confusion among diehard country fans, it nevertheless showcased the boldness of George's artistic spirit. He never entirely abandoned his core country roots, of course, but these side ventures proved his restless drive to expand his repertoire and discover new ways to make his voice stand out. Fast forward to the 1970s. George's personal life began to unravel, even as his career soared to new heights. He married fellow country superstar Tammy Wynette in 1969, and the couple soon became known as Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. Their duets, like We're Gonna Hold On, captured a touching intimacy that mirrored the public's romantic notions of them. In reality, however, the union faced mounting stress from George's escalating battles with alcohol, the demands of touring, and Tammy's own personal struggles. Yet whenever they sang, it was pure magic, a reminder of the synergy that great collaborators can share. Their heartbreak ballads resonated in an era that prized raw, confessional art, much like the groundbreaking films emerging from Hollywood at the time. Both in cinema and in music, truth-telling and introspection had become prized qualities, and George Jones, with that voice full of trembling sorrow, fit right in. Around this point, friends and fellow musicians started noticing the toll that George's lifestyle was taking on him. More than once, he'd go on a bender that led to missed shows, earning him the unfortunate nickname No-Show Jones. One widely told story has him riding a lawnmower to the liquor store after Tammy hid the car keys to keep him at home. That image, iconic in its own tragicomic way, hinted at the level of dependence and desperation he'd descended into. He found himself hospitalized on multiple occasions due to accidents or alcohol-related incidents. Critics began to question whether he could keep it together long enough to maintain his star status. Some close friends worried that he wouldn't survive another few years at the pace he was living. Despite the turmoil, his artistry seemed only to deepen. The mid-1970s saw hits like The Grand Tour, another soul-bearing ballad that showcased his ability to make listeners feel like they were living the heartbreak themselves. He could, in a single phrase, move audiences to tears and leave them feeling as if they'd shared in his very personal tragedies. By the late 1970s, however, the spiral of addictions, debts, and personal conflicts became so severe that some in the industry had all but written him off. He got divorced from Tammy Wynette in 1975, and in the aftermath, his downward slide seemed unstoppable. But in 1980, something miraculous happened, an unexpected creative renaissance that would etch his name into the annals of country music forever. He Stopped Loving Her Today, produced by Billy Sherrill, was released. The song, with its mournful strings and the hushed intensity of George's vocal delivery, became an instant classic, eventually hailed by many as the greatest country song of all time. Critics credit its genius not only to the songwriting and production, but also to the sheer, unvarnished sincerity George Jones brought to it. The tune made an almost visceral impact on listeners, blending heartbreak, love, and finality into an unforgettable emotional wallop. It dominated the country charts and led to a new wave of fans discovering his earlier work, effectively revitalizing his career at a moment when many thought it was irredeemably marred by his personal battles. For the next several years, George rode that new wave of success, picking up multiple awards and regaining the trust of fans. He took steps towards sobriety, though it was far from a smooth road. One friend recalled seeing him backstage at a show in 1982, looking frail yet determined, saying, "I owe it to these folks to be here." That was George at his most human, haunted by his demons, but also driven by an unbreakable bond with his audience. People who met him in those years describe him as a man caught between wanting to escape his pain and wanting to deliver the kind of performance that justified the love and adoration he received. The tension between these desires created a fascinating, often heartbreaking dynamic that resonated with fans. They saw not just a celebrity, but a person struggling and persevering, a living testament to the notion that extraordinary talent can arise from extraordinary difficulty. By the late 1980s, Jones had found some stability in his personal life. He married Nancy Sepulvado in 1983, a relationship that many would describe as his saving grace. Her patient efforts and unwavering devotion helped guide him toward sobriety. Though his recovery was marked by relapses and stumbles, for the first time it felt like he had a real support system at home, one powerful enough to keep him on the rails. His musical output in the 1990s was more sporadic, but he continued to chart with heartfelt ballads and duets that showcased the timeless quality of his voice, which even in his advancing years retained that aching, tear-soaked resonance. In his later years, the man behind the mic gradually became more open about sharing his personal regrets and the toll that years of substance abuse took on his relationships, finances, and body. A seldom cited eyewitness account from a session musician who worked with him in the early 1990s reveals how even mundane recording sessions could turn into deeply emotional experiences when George was in the booth. According to this musician, George often had tears in his eyes after nailing a particularly sad lyric, and he'd quietly say, "This is for them," meaning his fans who had stuck by him all those years. That simple admission touched the entire recording team and underscored the depth of feeling in every note he sang. Yet personal tragedies continued to pop up in smaller or subtler forms. He would sometimes vanish before a rehearsal or go off the radar for days, sparking rumors that he had relapsed. While he often managed to pull through and keep his commitments, the lingering shadow of his old addictions never completely left him. On one occasion, in the early 1990s, after nearly a decade of relative steadiness, he got into a serious car accident that many attributed to drinking. Though the official story was murky, with George claiming he had simply lost control while driving too fast, the press speculated about a relapse. This was a time of public debate over celebrities' responsibilities as role models, and George found himself at the center of discussions about whether fans should forgive repeated lapses. The pressure to stay sober, remain creatively relevant, and satisfy the critical curiosity about his personal life weighed heavily on him. Critics and historians debate how much these controversies overshadowed his later work. On one hand, his voice remained a gem, older, yes, and maybe a bit more ragged, but still piercing in its sincerity. On the other hand, the spectacle of his personal life often hijacked the narrative. Older fans, in particular, tended to be protective of him, insisting that the best way to honor George Jones was to treasure his music rather than dwell on his shortcomings. But younger critics, shaped by a more modern media landscape, argued that celebrities who repeatedly stumbled under the public eye had a responsibility to address their problems openly. George found himself in a tricky position, needing to be transparent enough to quiet scandalous rumors, yet also wanting to maintain some semblance of privacy as he moved into his senior years. Through it all, the intangible magic of his singing never truly waned. By the 2000s, Jones was widely revered as an elder statesman of country music. He received numerous accolades, including a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, signifying the depth of his impact on American music. When he performed live, the crowd sometimes spanned 3 generations, from grandparents who fondly remembered hearing him on crackling radios, to young fans who discovered his classic hits through streaming services or recommendations from older relatives. Many who attended his concerts during this period found them profoundly moving experiences, often describing how he'd look out at the audience with this humble gratitude that seemed to say, "I'm still here and I'm still singing for you." As he reached his late 70s, health challenges became more frequent. He suffered various respiratory complications and underwent multiple hospital visits. Doctors recommended scaling back his touring schedule, but George Jones loved the stage too much to remain idle for long. Nancy encouraged him to take his time to recover fully between gigs, but more often than not, he insisted on pushing forward. There was a quiet acceptance among his fan base, an understanding that at any moment this might be his final tour, his last major concert. Each performance felt tinged with the knowledge that time was running short. In his final years, George took on a more reflective tone in interviews. He openly admitted that his struggles with alcohol and debt had caused untold pain to those closest to him and to fans who had traveled miles to see him only to be disappointed by canceled shows. Yet he said he didn't dwell on regret for the sake of self-pity. Rather, he hoped his story could serve as a cautionary tale for younger artists who might find themselves tempted by the same pitfalls. There was a profound humility in his later statements, a warm, almost grandfatherly quality that many older viewers found deeply relatable. He wasn't a saint preaching from on high, but a flawed man who had paid dearly for his mistakes. By the early 2010s, controversies had quieted down, replaced by a near universal appreciation for the living legend he had become. Still, occasional debates would flare up over whether he deserved unwavering adulation, given the many no-shows and outbursts over the decades. Some critics cited him as an example of the damaging cyclical nature of celebrity addiction. Others, however, pointed out that Jones never stopped fighting to redeem himself, eventually showing genuine remorse and trying earnestly to make amends. The complexities of his story mirrored the complexities of real life, a testament to the fact that no artist, no matter how gifted, can be fully understood or judged in simple black and white terms. He passed away on April 26, 2013, at the age of 81. News of his death spread quickly, and tributes poured in from across the music world. But the emotional outpouring didn't stop there. Politicians, actors, and fans from every corner of the globe shared stories of how George's music had served as the soundtrack to their lives. It was as if losing him was akin to losing a part of American heritage. In an era that sometimes feels saturated with fleeting trends and shallow fame, George Jones stood out as an artist whose emotional honesty was never in doubt. That honesty had cost him in terms of personal well-being, but it also made his art endure in ways few could match. Why should modern audiences, especially older viewers, still care about George Jones's story? Because it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. He was a man who time and again stumbled into darkness, tormented by addiction, financial woes, and the toxic demands of fame. Yet he always found his way back to the music that was his lifeline and to the fans who extended their unconditional love. His life is a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts we have, our talents, our passions, also carry with them the risk of self-destruction if not handled with care. For those who are old enough to recall the days of New Hollywood cinema or the golden age of country radio, George's story intersects beautifully with a time when creative frontiers were being pushed and true artistry was measured by authenticity rather than polish. His struggles in those final years also hold a cautionary lesson for a world that continues to idolize celebrities without fully understanding the pressures they endure. George paid a steep price for a life lived under the spotlight, but he also experienced extraordinary love and support from a community of fans who never let him go. That interplay between public adoration and personal turmoil reveals the humanity behind the myth. It shows us that no matter how grand the stage, people remain vulnerable, yearning creatures who need compassion and forgiveness. Whenever you listen to a classic Jones tune, especially He Stopped Loving Her Today, which might be the most famous example of heartbreak captured in musical form, there's an undeniable pull. It's as if he's singing directly from the depths of his battered heart through the ages, giving voice to the universal experience of loss and regret. That ability to connect is why, even now, when younger generations come across his recordings, they find themselves moved to tears. His voice transcends time because it was forged in pain, hope, and an unshakable love for country music itself. Looking back on his story now, we see a life marked by brilliance and tragedy, an arc that might be too dramatic if it were scripted as fiction, yet it happened in real life. This duality, epic success and epic struggle, speaks to the core of what makes George Jones a legend, not just in country music, but in the broader tapestry of American cultural history. For anyone studying the evolution of popular music or the cultural shifts of the late 20th century, Jones stands as a towering figure who defied the boundaries of genre and overcame crippling adversity to redefine how deeply a singer could connect with an audience. In wrapping up this journey through George Jones's life, legacy, and final years, we are left with the image of a man who poured every bit of himself into his craft. Whether he was singing in a dingy Texas honky-tonk as a kid or performing to a sold-out stadium in his final decades, he never lost the rawness that made people believe in him. His songs, especially those from his later career, carried the weight of someone who had truly lived out the stories he sang. And that is why listeners, young and old, still find solace and inspiration in his work, because it comes from a place of genuine triumph and heartbreak. If there's a final lesson to take from his life, it's this: talent alone can bring fame, but it's the human spirit, tested and tempered by hardship, that touches hearts for generations. George Jones may have left this world, but his voice lives on, reminding us of the messy, glorious, heartbreaking adventure that is being alive. And as we reflect on his final years, we can't help but feel a profound appreciation for the endurance of his spirit, the enduring depth of his songs, and the timeless wisdom that flows from a life fully, if imperfectly, lived.